All right, this is 7 Daughters and 7 Sons, Part 1, Chapter 3. A bend in the Souq brought me to the handsome buildings of the Nizamiya College, newly built by our Turkish masters for the study of theology. The golden age was past. There were no women students at the Nizamiya College. I stood at the curb, facing the wide, well-tended great road which ran along the bank of the river to one of the 9 gates in the wall that surrounded the Dar al-Khalifa, the Caliph's palaces. Behind those walls, the Caliphs built magnificent dwellings, tended luxurious gardens full of exotic imported plants, played polo, hunted lions and cheetahs, raised horses, and indulged themselves in who knows what unimaginable abominations. They had wandered far from the path prescribed by the holy prophets, and now it was not they, but the Turkish Seljuk sultans who truly ruled the land between 2 rivers. The sun rose. The walls, the gate, the palm trees glowed rose and gold. The voices of the muezzins on the minarets within and without the wall called believers everywhere to prayer. God is great, God is great. There is no God but God. When would I see my beautiful city again? When would I walk the streets of home? I had promised my mother that I would return after 3 summers had come and gone. But even as I'd spoken, I'd known I was making a promise that was, perhaps, beyond my power to keep. I hurried on. Around the last bend of the Souq, I came to the Khan, the inn, the caravanserai, where caravans gathered, where they rested on their way, and where most of the wholesale business of cities was conducted. The wide gate stood open. I peeked inside. The courtyard was jammed with men, white men, yellow men, black men, tan men. Some were dressed like the men I knew, like me, myself. Others wore outlandish costumes in colors of which I'd only dreamed. Still others covered their bodies with almost nothing at all. The din of their voices filled my ears, but I couldn't understand anything I heard. Their languages were as varied as their dress and their skin. I drew back outside the gate. Where was I to go? To whom was I to speak? I felt as lost as a fledgling that's fallen from the nest. The smart thing to do, I thought, was simply to turn around and go home. This was no place for Boran, sheltered and protected daughter of that Malik who was known throughout Baghdad as Abu al-Banat. Next to the gate, built into the wall, was a great tank hewn out of stone and kept full of water for the benefit of all who passed, thanks to an endowment left by a wealthy citizen, ensuring through blessed charity his place in paradise. I pushed aside the marble lid, filled the copper ladle, fastened firmly to the lid with a chain, and drank the cold water until I was satisfied. It seemed to fill me with courage as it quenched my thirst. This was no place for Boran, but it was the right place, the only place, for Nazir, self-created that very morning and out to make his way in the world. I threw back my shoulders, thrust out my chin, and stepped forward through the gate with just a touch of a swagger, much like the one I had seen in the Walk of Hassan, as I peered at him through curtains and arches 100 times. A few men were squatting on benches of baked bricks on both sides of the gate. I picked out the one with the kindest-looking face, and approached him. "Peace be with you," I greeted him. "And to you, son," he answered. "I seek a place in the caravan," I said, dispensing with any further formalities. "Then go find Gindar the Rais," "The chief, or you won't make the journey," the man warned me. "You can't miss him," he added with a laugh. Then he turned away to talk to his neighbor. I stepped down into the huge open courtyard. I was swallowed up in the melee. Horses, donkeys, camels, and shepherd dogs neighed and hee-hawed and barked. The beaten dirt of the ground was covered with bales of merchandise, stuffed saddlebags, packages wrapped in leather, and countless other bundles in the process of being loaded onto the backs of animals. I had come just in time. In another half an hour, the caravan would have departed, leaving nothing in the courtyard but piles of dung for the porters to clean away before the arrival of the next caravan, the next crowd of merchants and traders. I stepped through a door into the vast inner roofed courtyard. It was just as crowded with human beings as the outer area, but it was at least free of animals. All around, above and below, doors opened into it from the countless rooms where the travelers lodged. I went from one chattering group of men to another, but not one man I saw looked to me like the Rais. In my mind, I carried a picture of Gindar the chief, and though the realities I had so far encountered were nothing like I had imagined, I was still wedded to the images inside of my own head. Once again in the outer courtyard, I approached a camel driver singing softly to himself as he slung a hudaj over a kneeling animal. His white teeth sparkled in his dark, shining face, and he had a cheerful gleam in his bright black eyes. I mustered up the courage I needed to speak to him. Since the day I had become a woman, he and the man sitting at the gate were the first men other than my father to whom I had spoken without wearing a hijab that covered my face. But, I reminded myself, now I was not a woman. I was Nazir. "Pardon me, uncle," I called out in a tone that I hoped was both good-natured and slightly condescending. He was only a camel driver after all, and I was supposed to be a traveling merchant. "Can you assist me with some directions?" "Certainly, my son," the driver responded. "What do you want to know?" "Where can I find the leader of this caravan?" I asked. "Where can I find that fearful horseman, Gindar the chief?" With a light touch on the camel's knees, the driver persuaded the animal to rise. Then he turned his full attention to me. "What do you want him for, my son?" he asked. I drew myself up to my full height. "What business is that of yours, camel driver?" I asked haughtily. He smiled. Now, don't get uppity, my son. It certainly is my business, for I am that fearful horseman, Gindar the chief." His eyes shone with laughter. "I'm also a fearful camel driver, a fearful marksman, and even a fearful camp cook, if the need arises." "Pardon me, honored chief," I murmured, ducking my head with sudden politeness. But I wasn't afraid. It was impossible to be afraid of such a cheerful man, even though his broad shoulders and 6 feet or more of height suggested that he wasn't the sort of person one would care to have for an enemy. My mistake was perhaps understandable. Gindar stood very close to me, his imposing figure making me feel positively scrawny. "Do you wish to join my caravan?" he asked. I nodded mutely. "You've never traveled caravan before," he said. It was a statement, not a question. "That's true," I admitted. "Then you must understand," he continued, "that on my caravan, the ranks and classes that are so important in cities count for nothing. We are all equal, because the safety of all depends on the cooperation of all. If you travel with me, you treat everyone else in the group, as if he were the Sultan in disguise, as indeed he might be. A man on my caravan will tell you as much about himself as he wants to know. Don't ask him any questions, and he won't ask you any. I nodded. That suited me fine. What's the fee? I asked. You come too late, he replied briskly. He saw the shocked look on my face and smiled a little, as if he'd planned the whole exchange to achieve just that effect. I'm all filled up. Yusuf ibn Bekr leads another caravan to the coast in a couple of days. Wait for him. What do you mean, you're all filled up? I cried. How can that be? What difference does it make if another person comes along? Don't speak foolishly, my son, he said, and the patronizing manner was all on his side now. I can carry only so much food, and besides, if there are too many people, someone always manages to get lost. I'm only one, I begged. I couldn't wait. I couldn't go home with my hair cut short and my women's clothes abandoned and my sisters believing a fib about my having gone to be a servant. I couldn't hang around Baghdad all by myself either. I'd use up too much money and run the risk of being recognized. The enormous sense of self-congratulation that had possessed me the day before as I'd come home from shopping in the Souq was all gone now. Still, there was nothing for it to go forward. I fell to my knees. Please, please, honored chief, take me with you. It is essential that I leave Baghdad today. I have some food of my own. Your cook and your baker won't have to prepare anything for me. I'm such a small, unimportant person. I'll take up no significant space. I'll sleep in the open. I'll travel the whole distance on foot. I'll be very good about keeping up. I beg you, honored chief, take me with you. Get up, silly boy, he said, putting his hand on my upper arm and lifting me willy-nilly to my feet. I told you, we are all equal here. No one has to grovel before Gindar the African. No one ever accused me of having a hard heart either. If it is so important to you, then you may come. It'll cost you 5 dinars. 5 dinars. I was flabbergasted. If I gave Gindar 5 dinars, I would be left with only 9. I couldn't even live in a town for more than a few months, let alone set up shop with just 9 dinars in my pouch. It was impossible. Why hadn't I asked my father to investigate these details more thoroughly? Why had I imagined that a caravan journey all the way to the sea would cost me only 2 dinars? Why had I supposed that what I had imagined was what was true? I was faint with a sudden realization of my own ignorance, my own naivete. Without a word, I turned away from Gindar and began to pick my way among the noisy, milling crowd back to the gate. I would go home. I would go home not 2 hours after I'd left, confess my failure, take off my jubbah, put on my hijab, wait for my hair to grow back, and then, in penance, truly go for a servant in a rich man's house, where my maidenhood would be lost in a month's time, considered by my employer justified compensation for my lack of skill at housewifely tasks. So bleak was that prospect that another thought occurred to me. It would be better to attempt to cross the desert by myself and die on the journey, my bones picked clean by vultures and left to bleach in the sun, than go back home. Anything would be better than the cowardice that a return to my father's house would represent. So I hadn't even reached the Thalathal Bridge when I turned back again. I would try Gindar the African once more before I set out on my own. Inside the caravanserai, a fat merchant was mounting the camel Gindar had saddled, assisted by a ragged boy. Gindar had disappeared, but he couldn't have gone far. "Please, gracious lad," I called, remembering Gindar's stricture about the Sultan in disguise. "Could you tell me where Gindar the chief has gone? It's urgent that I see him." The boy lifted his hand to point toward the doorway leading inside, but before he could say anything, the fat man on the camel spoke. "Tend your business, boy," he ordered sharply. "You haven't any time for gossip." Apparently, the merchant had never heard Gindar's speech about the democracy of the Caravan. But I had already glimpsed Gindar in the group to which the boy had pointed. It would be impossible to miss him. His tall, dark form towered so far above the others. I hurried toward him as quickly as I could in that milling throng. I didn't want to lose sight of him again. His back was to me when I reached him. "Honored Rais," I said quite loudly when I was almost on top of him. It was difficult for me to speak up, but I had to in order to be heard above the din. He turned. "You again?" he asked with a little laugh when he saw me. "Did you come back to bargain with me? I'm not a bazaar merchant. My price is my price." "I wouldn't doubt that for a moment," I hastened to assure him. "But I must leave Baghdad. It is essential. I don't have 5 dinars to give you." I kept my tone and my carriage carefully polite, but proud and free. I wouldn't grovel. That wasn't a tactic to please a man like Gindar anyway. Couldn't I travel as a servant? If not as yours, then for one of the merchants. I would do anything at all, and I wouldn't ask for any pay other than my passage. "What other pay could you expect?" Gindar asked. "What are you able to do?" Not much that needed to be done on a caravan, but I trusted the quickness of my mind to teach me. I'd already learned a lot in a very short time. "Anything," I replied firmly. "Anything at all." A thin, long-legged, sun-browned man standing next to Gindar spoke up. "Brother," he said, "Jiha isn't satisfied with his boy, who cries day and night for his village and his mother. Jiha would be very, very happy to send the boy home and be rid of him if he had someone else to serve him." "Me," I cried. "Let it be me. You'll never regret it, kind sir, nor you, Chief Gindar, nor will Jiha, whoever he is." Gindar laughed. "I see now that I can't escape. God has decreed that for good or ill, you are meant to make this journey with us." He put his hand on the other man's shoulder. "Abu Sinan, take this lad to Jiha, and good luck to him." If I'd been listening as closely as I should have been, I would have been worried at the ironic tone in which Gindar spoke that final phrase. But I was so overjoyed at the success of my ploy that I had no room for anything in my mind but satisfaction. "Come, lad," Abu Sinan said. "Follow me." I smiled. Thank you, Chief Gindar." Abu Sinan was already on his way, and I hurried after him. "Wait," Gindar called. "Wait." I stopped. So did Abu Sinan. "You know my name," Gindar said. "What's yours?" My mouth opened, my tongue moved to my lips. But, praise God, before I could form the word Buran, my mouth snapped shut again. When I reopened it, I was able to utter smoothly, "Nazir, Chief. Nazir ibn Malik." My father's name was so common, I thought it did no harm not to lie about that at least. "Well, child of Malik," Gindar said, Make sure you serve Jiha well. I'm jeopardizing my reputation as a truth speaker for your sake. Don't worry, honored chief. I'll not fail you, I assured him. I am eternally grateful to you for your help. God will reward you, even if I can't. Gindar laughed again. We'll see if your eternal gratitude lasts as long as it takes us to get to the coast. He turned away then to tend to the loading of a donkey, appearing to forget I'd ever existed. Come along, lad, Abu Sinan ordered. I followed him, almost at a trot, in an effort to keep up with his long strides as he crossed rapidly through the camp. In a moment, we were in the presence of Jiha. I had seen Jiha before. What had happened to my luck this morning? Jiha was the very same absurdly fat man whose unfortunate servant I had spoken to a little while earlier. He still sat astride his camel. Once he'd managed to settle his enormous bulk atop the poor creature, he was forced to remain there until he dismounted for the night. For him, getting on and off a camel was not an enterprise casually undertaken. His boy was holding the camel's reins. Jiha was screaming at the boy like a wild baboon, his face flushed red as blood, his waving arm cutting the air like a sword. You fool! Why did you force me on top of this creature when it's obvious that this caravan won't move for another half-hour? It's lucky for you that you're down there and I'm up here, or I'd beat you within an inch of your life. The boy turned up his tear-streaked, dirty face. But, Rais, he moaned, you told me to help you mount. I dared not disobey you. This explanation didn't improve Jiha's temper. Whatever have I done to God, he shouted, that I should be cursed with such a stupid servant? Jiha, Abu Sinan called. The curse is lifted. I've brought you a new servant. At this I bowed low. Peace be with you, honored chief, I said. Straighten up, boy, so I can get a good look at you. I obeyed. The dirty-faced lad had stopped crying. He gazed at me with eyes full of such hope that he seemed to believe I was the prophet himself, come to redeem the entire human race. You're awfully small, said Jiha. But very strong, honored chief, I assured him. I can't afford to pay you anything while we're on caravan, he added. That was obviously a lie. He was garbed completely in silk. Even his traveling vest and jacket were of silk. Once I've traded my goods in the cities along the coast, I'll make it up to you. He was lying, again. Neither along the coast nor anywhere else would I or any other servant of his ever see so much as a dirham in cash. It didn't matter. If one poor boy ran off, he could always find another to sign on in expectation of the crumbs from his table and the chance to steal something. I knew his type. My uncle was cut from the same cloth. But it didn't matter to me. I had no intention of remaining with him once I reached the coast. Perhaps it should have mattered. Perhaps I should have given some thought in advance to what it would be like to spend 6 weeks or more as the servant of such a man. Perhaps I should not have once again acted so hastily. But when there isn't any choice, one must act. I now knew that I knew nothing about the world, but if I had let that stop me, I would have gone home again, and nothing would ever have happened to me. At least, not anything I wanted to have happen. And if I suffered too, well, when my mother said, as she did at least once a day, that nothing in life is without its price, she spoke no less than the truth. Jiha would have let the dirty-faced boy go without any means of returning to his village, but Abu Sinan shamed him into tossing the lad a dirham or two. He scrabbled for them in the dust. I was tempted to give him one of my own. However, I didn't want anyone to see that I had any money at all. Not Jiha, not Abu Sinan, not anyone. But I undid my mother's packet and handed him 2 loaves of flatbread for his journey home. I thought I could afford to be generous. In my usual fashion, I made an assumption. I supposed that Jiha was obliged, at least, to feed me. A shout resounded suddenly throughout the courtyard. The voice was so loud that it could be heard above the clangor and din of men and animals. The surprising shriek sent a shiver down my back, but then I realized it was only the public crier. "Oh, noble travelers," he called. "Oh, noble travelers! With the help of God, we are ready to proceed." Slowly the caravan wound out of the Khan's wide gate, down the street of the Souq, and across the Thalatha bridge. We traversed the area where, 300 years before, the Abbasi Caliph Abu Ja'far al-Mansur had built the first Baghdad, the round city known as Dar al-Salam, the city of peace. Its 3 walls, its great mosque, its golden palace at the heart of the circle were gone now, destroyed by floods and storms, lightning and thunderbolts. Only the minaret and part of the gate still stood, faded, but still glorious mementos of a marvelous age. We passed Al-Maristan, the hospital where my uncle had wanted my father to go when he was ill. I had never seen it before. By itself, it was a whole city, rising on the ruins of the very palace where Queen Scheherazade had told her wonderful tales. The road curved to the northwest. The caravan halted beside the great canal that flows from the Euphrates River. Abu Sinan, bringing up the rear of the caravan, pulled the rein of his camel. Gindar, on the back of the tallest camel I'd ever seen, turned toward him. The chief and his assistant galloped toward each other, conferred briefly without dismounting, and returned to their places. We moved on, crossed the bridge over the canal, and found ourselves on the green, watered plain that edges the desert. The caravan picked up speed. All morning I walked beside Jiha's camel, my hand gripping the rope binding together the string of donkeys carrying his goods. Mile after mile we traveled beneath the blazing sun. My feet stumbled on rocks that lay across the track. Each time that happened, Jiha flicked his whip in my direction. "You clumsy fool," he shouted. "I'll lose my whole train if you aren't more careful. How stupid of me to listen to Abu Sinan and take on a fool like you." By noon, my feet were covered with blisters. My hand was sore from the pressure of the rope. I could scarcely breathe through the dust in my nostrils. My eyes were blinded from the sun's glare. We paused for midday prayers. Abu Sinan became the muezzin, calling out, "God is great, God is great." Most of the travelers dismounted, spread small rugs on the ground, and turned their faces toward the holy city, and knelt to murmur 7 times holy verses. Other merchants among us, Jewish and Hindu, of course, did not join the prayers. They prayed in their own way at their own times. I worshipped as the devout follower I never ceased to be. No matter what costume I wore, it was my duty to pray 5 times a day. But Jiha didn't dismount. He was too large, and the job of getting him back on his camel would have taken too much precious time. He drank water from his goatskin flask. I drank from mine. "The 3rd donkey carries the food," he shouted. "Bring me 2 loaves of bread, some dates and raisins, and a green onion." I found the food, brought it back, and handed it to him. I stood silently at his camel's side, staring up at him as he tore at the bread with eager fingers and stuffed half a loaf into his mouth at once. He seemed to swallow it without chewing. Only after he'd gulped down the other half did he pause long enough to look down and realized that I was still standing beneath him. "Well, boy," he snapped, "what are you staring at? Go away." I bowed. "Honored Chief," I asked, "what food is provided for your devoted servant?" I was very hungry. I knew I couldn't expect dates or an onion. A loaf of bread would have to satisfy me. For even half a loaf, I would thank him humbly. "Food?" Jiha cried, his face turning red with fury. "You expect me to feed you? Who are you that I should feed you? I paid Gindar for your place in this caravan. How dare you expect anything more?" If his hands hadn't been full of bread and onion, I think I would have felt the crack of his whip on my shoulders. I turned away and went back to the donkey that was carrying my small store. I felt in my pack for my mother's loaves, but then I withdrew my hand. If I didn't want to waste a good part of my tiny fortune on food, I'd better make what I had go as far as I could. I would wait until night to eat. Bitterly, bitterly did I regret the 2 loaves I'd given so freely to the dirty-faced boy. I reached up and rubbed my cheek with my finger. Then I stared at the black grit that came off in my hand. Now I, too, was a dirty-faced boy. Soon the caravan started moving again. After an hour or 2, I stopped feeling hot. I stopped feeling tired. I stopped feeling sore. I stopped feeling hungry. I was simply numb. The rope remained clutched in my hand because my fingers were paralyzed shut. My feet moved one in front of the other because my mind was too weary to tell them not to. When the sun glowed red on the western horizon, the caravan halted. We recited our evening prayers and then moved on again. It was not until after midnight that we came to Al-Anbar, where the great canal meets the Euphrates River. We halted at last in the courtyard of the largest caravanserai in the whole busy little town, swarming, like all the others, with traders and merchants from all over the world. I was so exhausted that as soon as I stopped putting one foot in front of the other, I fell to the ground. "Boy!" Jiha screamed. "What's the matter with you? Get me off this beast this minute, or your own mother won't recognize your face if she ever sees it again." I hoisted my aching body out of the dirt and walked over to Jiha's camel as quickly as my blistered feet would carry me. I struck the animal on the legs to make him kneel, as I had seen Gindar do that very morning. To my infinite surprise, the creature obeyed. I think I smiled then, but I really didn't know what to do next. Fortunately, there were camels kneeling all around me. I watched their drivers undo the hujaj and then started to imitate their movements with slow, clumsy gestures of my own. "Now what?" Jiha complained. Why are you looking here, looking there, like a mooncalf? Tend to your business, boy. I'll teach you to take advantage of my good nature. And he cursed me with a string of curses such as I'd never dreamed our blessed language possessed. It was the first time in my life I had heard such words. But not the last. He cursed me again when I returned from the cook's fire carrying his supper, because he said it had taken me so long I must have dawdled on the way. And he cursed me yet again while he was eating, because the food was not as hot as he thought it ought to be. Serving a meal was the one task required of me that I already knew how to do, but even so I couldn't please him. While he ate, I unloaded all the pack animals, laden with Jiha's extensive stock of wares. Again, I learned what to do by observing others. Again, it took me a very long time. When I started to work on the third donkey, the one that carried personal stores, I couldn't resist temptation. Besides, I thought that to steal food from Jiha was to take only what was my due. If I nabbed a bit to eat from him, my own supply would last one day longer. He expected it. All servants stole. Quickly, I extracted a loaf from a pack. I tore a piece from the loaf and shoved it in my mouth. At that instant, I felt a huge hand grab my shoulder. Who would have thought such a mountain of a man could move as lightly and silently as a gazelle? "I caught you, thief!" he shouted. "Do you think I wasn't watching you?" He shook me so hard I thought my brains would fall out through my nose. The bread dropped from my hands. I ran away from Jiha as fast as my sore feet would carry me, tears streaming down my cheeks, and my heart filled with envy for the dirty-faced boy who was on his way home to his village and his mother. In the Khan there was no place to hide. I darted between clumps of camels, donkeys, and men jamming the court. I ran through the gate and down the dusty, narrow road. Beyond the village, there was nothing but miles of emptiness. Though we were only one day out of Baghdad, to venture back myself would probably have meant death. The desert is bitter cold at night, and in the dark I'd never be able to find my way. Gindar could ask and get 5 dinars from those who wished to join his caravan for the simple reason that he knew the way. Alone in the desert, one died surely, from the cold, or the heat, or the thirst, or starvation, or the attack of wild beasts, or occasionally, in spite of the strict laws enforced by the Caliph and Sultan, the attack of wild men. I was out of breath. I sat down on a large boulder, pushing up out of the rocky soil, put my head in my hands and wept. I think if nothing had interrupted me, I might have cried until my tears washed me away, and in the morning, when the caravan moved out, someone might have noticed a little mud puddle beside the boulder, all that was left of me.